Members, the Speaker.
It is important and appropriate that to get today across the chamber, we stand together to unequivocally condemn anti-Semitism in all its forms, just as we should condemn hatred in all its forms directed at any group in our community.
Mr Speaker, I move that so much of the standing and sessional orders be suspended as would prevent the following. 1. The member for Wentworth moving a motion relating to anti-Semitism.
In both Houses of Parliament today, there was an attempt at a show of unity against anti-Semitism. But the message of unity and zero tolerance was, from the start, sometimes a bit hard to hear.
What should be happening in this instance, a motion being moved by the government, indeed a motion being moved by the Prime Minister. Why on earth the Prime Minister is not in here showing leadership and moving this motion after the summer we have had is an absolute outrage.
In the House of Representatives, the government cleared the ground for the independent MP, who represents one of the electorates with one of the largest Jewish communities in the country, to lead the debate.
That this House, 1, deplores the appalling and unacceptable rise in anti-Semitism across Australia, including violent attacks on synagogues, schools, homes and childcare centres. 2, unequivocally condemns anti-Semitism in all its forms. And 3, resolves that all parliamentarians will work together constructively to combat the scourge of anti-Semitism in Australia.
Spender was joined by speakers from across the political divide in the House.
We cannot let anti-Semitism become a partisan issue. It has never existed on a political spectrum. And I say there are things that I disagree with the Liberal Party about, but not this.
I will not cop criticism for standing up for my family, my community or the country I love in the face of a government that has constantly let down the Jewish community and every law-abiding Australian.
And by the Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition.
In addition to the laws we have passed, this government has made multiple commitments and investments to combat anti-Semitism. I say to Jewish Australians, live proudly, stand tall, you belong here and Australia stands with you.
People who were born here who know little of Israel and little of that life, they're talking about leaving our country and going to Israel because they feel safer there. This is a time of national crisis and it has been brewing away and been in the making for a long period of time.
The Coalition sought changes to the resolution in the House to strike out a statement that the House condemned all similar hatred directed to any groups in our community.
We also think it is inexplicable to try and mount the argument that this sort of hatred and this sort of racism and this sort of anti-Semitism is being conveyed against any other pocket of Australian community.
In the Senate, the Coalition and Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe sought to amend the resolution to put in explicit references to places of worship or racism.
What the Jewish community has been asking of governments, state and federal, in this country for 15 months now is for action to accompany the words of condemnation.
We know the Liberal Party struck out racism from that original motion. Don't understand why. And why aren't you calling out the white supremacists and their part in this?
The Greens and I have been calling out racism in all its forms. For before anyone in here was doing it. We've been calling out right-wing extremism, neo-Nazism, which is a threat to everyone in this country.
That shouldn't come down to politics. It shouldn't come down to amendments. OK, it shouldn't come down to these people need to be shown the love. They are feeling the hurt and they are feeling the pressure and God forbid their kids don't even want to go to school. This is not about politics. This is about saying, you know what, we're here for you. We're here for you. We have your backs.
Politicians were united that dealing with anti-Semitism requires more than just words, including via proposed new laws to strengthen hate crimes that were originally introduced by the government last year.
First of all, it would expand an existing offence that is contained in the Commonwealth Criminal Code. A modest change, but one for criminal law types is significant. It would change the fault element for the offence of urging violence against a particular targeted group from intention to recklessness. And this change is typically designed to make it somewhat easier for the prosecution to secure a conviction, while still maintaining that basic principle that criminal offences should turn on subjective blameworthiness. The second thing was the bill proposes the introduction of a second-tier offence for threatening violence against a targeted group, which would attract a penalty of 5 years compared to the 7-year penalty for urging violence.
A long list of MPs have indicated they wish to speak on the legislation, led by Coalition frontbencher David Coleman, flagging opposition amendments which specifically refer to crimes at places of worship.
I rise to speak on the Criminal Code Amendment.
Allegra Spender today also signalled amendments which would expand the definition of hate crimes to include offences which promote violence or hatred, even if they do not explicitly urge or threaten violence, as the current proposed laws do.
Australian parliaments have resisted the idea that the promotion of various forms of vilification should in and of itself be criminal. And so a line has been held for decades now that makes a distinction between the civil wrong of racial vilification, to use the common shorthand, and the serious criminal offence of racial vilification that involves threats of violence or threats to property. And I think there is an important line to be held between those two sorts of harms.
Debate on the hate crimes legislation looks set to continue throughout this current fortnight of Parliament.
Allegra Spender is the independent MP for Wentworth. She joined me earlier. Allegra Spender, welcome to 7:30.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the government's bill on hate speech sets the threshold for a person committing a crime at threats of violence or use of force. Why isn't that strong enough? Why do you want to go further?
So I support where the government is going with this legislation, but I want to go further, and that is the question I'm really trying to address is those people who are promoting and really pushing hate in our community. So currently under the current legislation, things like some neo-Nazi protests which had destroy pedo freaks as a banner. That wouldn't be covered under the current legislation. The hate preachers who soon after October 7 preached for the final solution in the Jews. Now we know what that means, we know what Hitler meant when he said that, but that wouldn't be covered under the current legislation because it's about sort of threats to violence rather than actually hate speech. But I come back to what Mike Burgess said and has said consistently, which is that words matter. Yeah, yes. And that, you know, if we have hate words that are there to promote hate, that can lead and is part of a move to violence, and that violence I don't think is what we want in the community.
At the same time, neither the government nor the opposition supports your proposal because of the potential consequences for free speech in Australia. For example, a religious group being targeted for expressing traditional or preaching traditional beliefs. Is there a possibility that your proposal is divisive?
Look, I don't think so, and I think we need to be realistic about, you know, we've had legislation like this in WA for more than 20 years that has been tested in the courts, and it hasn't, I think, had undermined free speech or the ability for people to practice religion freely. I think we need to come back to what the purpose of this is, which is about stopping people who are promoting hatred, you know, promoting harassment. That's really the heart of it. And you're seeing New South Wales is considering this, Victoria is considering this, and what I'm arguing for is to say we should have a national approach about this because this is an important issue. I think Australians, you know, it's one of the most diverse countries in the world, and I think all Australians, I think, value the fact that, you know, we are a welcoming society, that, you know, you're welcome, whatever ethnicity, religion, sexuality, gender, you are welcome here. And I think we do have a real question, I think, when the community members I speak to, is to say, if people are promoting hate, if they're trying to drive hate in our society, shouldn't we have some guardrails around that?
This is a sort of broader question about what you face in the election in relation to this. Do you think that anti-Semitism and the government's response is going to be a vote-deciding issue in your electorate?
Look, it is. I think it is a really important issue in the electorate, and I will say, you know, yesterday, and that's not surprising because we've had some of the highest number of attacks, and we have the biggest Jewish community in the country. I was speaking to a friend of mine yesterday who's got kids similar ages to mine, sort of primary school age kids, and he was saying, look, we're trying to protect our kids from this, but they're asking us, why are the police constantly coming by supply our school? Why are we no longer going on excursions? Why are we not, able to wear our school uniform, encouraged not to wear our school uniform on public buses? And so it's pretty profound, the impact that it has. But I think that I don't want this to be a political issue, and this is not just about the Jewish community. This is about any community that faces hate. Now, the Jewish community is facing a lot of hate at the moment and a lot of anti-Semitism at the moment, but this is an issue that does affect different parts of our community over time. It is one that has affected the LGBTQI community over a long period of time, and that is also a big issue for them. So, I'm trying to do the right thing because I hear a lot of this from the community, but it does affect more broadly than just my particular community.
Has the government and has the opposition explained to you why they don't support your amendment?
Well, look, I'm still, as far as I am concerned, in discussions with them. We've put it forward. We've said, look, answer any questions, and following up. Because
what are they saying to you specifically about why they won't support it?
Look, at the moment, those discussions are still pretty preliminary. The government originally was pushing serious vilification. The opposition, I spoke to Michaelia Cash yesterday and outlined and gave her the legislation we were basing it on, which is from WA, and said, look, come back to us with any questions. And that's where it's at the moment.
But have they explained to you on principle why they're not supporting it?
Well, because they haven't made a commitment yet publicly that they're not supporting it.
So do you think that's still a possibility that they could?
Absolutely, and I certainly hope that they do. And look, people have said a lot of strong words recently, and there have been some strong words in the Parliament today about standing up against hate, and I think that is absolutely appropriate. But I also think that you need to follow up those strong words and say, well, what are the actions you want to take? And I think this is a series of actions that could make a difference in the community, and that's why I'm pushing it.
So do you think the Attorney-General still has an open mind that they could extend the bill to include these kinds of threats?
Well, I'm trying to make sure his mind is open. I'm doing my best.
Is his mind open as far as you can tell?
Well, we will see.
Just on a couple of other issues today, you had a business background before you won the seat of Wentworth. Do you support coalition policy allowing for small businesses to claim a tax deduction for business lunches up to $20,000 a year?
Look, I think there's a big discussion today about how much it would cost. And look, in principle, I've run businesses. I'd love to be able to take my team out for lunch. But when I'm talking to the small businesses in my electorate and actually around the country, they're saying, this isn't going to make a fundamental difference on whether they can keep their doors open and whether they can employ more people. So I've been pushing for things like increasing the number of employees under the Fair Work definition, because the biggest barrier, they tell me, actually, in terms of employing and increasing employment and engagement is actually some of the bureaucracy and some of that legislation to say increase the Fair Work legislation from 15 employees to 25 employees or 50. And I'm pushing the government and the coalition to get behind that, because I think that would make a really big difference to small businesses.
So this is not a significant policy as far as you're concerned?
I think it's like all things, it comes down to the cost, which we had a big debate about today. And I think the government, the coalition needs to release its costing if it's going to be clear on this is value for money. I know that would help the hospitality sector, but there are lots of pressures on the budget, and I do think that we need to be looking at to say, how do we make a fundamental difference to how easy it is to operate a small business?
A question about outcomes in the upcoming federal election. I've seen your campaign ad, and it leans very heavily into inclusivity being a value for Wentworth. Now, bearing in mind that the Leader of the Opposition says he wants to review funding for Welcome to Country ceremonies last year, he said he wouldn't stand in front of the Indigenous flag were he to become Prime Minister at press conferences. Are you still open to supporting Peter Dutton if it comes to a hung parliament?
Look, I've always said I would work with either side of the major parties if it comes to minority government, and that's true, and that holds really true.
So what does that mean about your campaign ad, which focuses on inclusivity in Wentworth?
That says about how I vote, how I represent the people, and what I advocate for. And that is, I think, the spirit of my community. My community is very inclusive. It does want everyone to be able to thrive. It doesn't like culture wars, I'll be honest. It is not a big fan of from the people that I speak, to sort of saying, a great government spending saving is going to be cutting Welcome to Country. It's not credible in terms of actually making a difference to the bottom line. It also feels like a culture war, to be honest. But that said, I can still represent my community. I would represent with anyone in government. But what I would do is advocate, vote, and put forward always the values of my community.
So you could get over the culture wars if it came to
of course I can.
Support for Peter Dutton to form government.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it depends on what is on the table. You know, there are big issues on the table. We've got the economy. We do need a smarter economy. We do need climate action, and that's absolutely critical. And we do need a kinder community. So, you know, these are the values of my community. There are some sub areas in that, but we do have some really big issues, and I'd put the economy front and centre, and how to really drive productivity and growth is a critical issue for the community as well.
So you've still got an open mind?
Always.
Allegra Spender, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks so much, Sarah.